Our presenter today is the head of our program. This is John McCain, section manager here with DHEC, and he's going to take us through the details on this year's grant opportunity. So with that, John, you all set?
Hey, thank you, Sam. Yep. And again, I think most of you probably have, we've probably spoken or exchanged emails in the past. But again, my name's John McCain. I'm the manager of the DAMS program here in DHEC. And my contact information is there. I'm happy to talk to any of you directly at any point regarding this grant. We also have, again, some good, talented staff, Sam and Brittany and several other staff help me with this grant program. And you can reach all of us via response@dhec.sc.gov. So that's kind of a catch-all email address for the dam safety program. So always, if you ever need to reach out to us, that will always get to someone's inbox. So today, if you've ever watched any of the previous webinars we've done on this grant, very similar agenda. We'll talk about the background and how this grant program got created and what the available funds are for this upcoming offering, the eligibility criteria for both the dams and the applicants, what eligible or allowable activities the grant can pay for. Then we'll kind of touch on the state and federal requirements of a grant award, and we're going to touch on some of the special requirements for construction, because this grant we will be able to fund construction, unlike last year. So we will be able to fund construction, but there are a lot of additional requirements for those types of projects. Then we'll go into the application process. And how DHEC reviews applications and makes and selects those projects for awards, the timeline for this year, and then the question and answer session. So the background of this grant is that the U.S. Congress created this program in 2016 when they created or passed the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act. But that was the creation of the program, but they did not appropriate any money. So there really was no grant to speak of. It was just an authorization. The actual first appropriation was in federal fiscal year 19, and that was only $10 million. And again, in the next year was $10 million. We started seeing some increases gradually. So fiscal year 2021 was 11 million, then 22 million. And then this is about when FEMA took a step back. FEMA knew they were going to receive a large amount of money from the upcoming or the IIJA, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so in FY23, there was no grant offering because FEMA was essentially kind of restructuring and preparing for a major influx of new funds. And so we had a year off basically. And so now here we are in federal fiscal year 24. And we're looking at $185,120,000 for the whole nation for this grant program. So that's and that will continue in FY25 and FY26. So we're looking at a big kind of slug of funds that's coming down from the federal government. After FY26, we don't know what's going to happen, but that equates to something somewhere over $500 million in 3 years for dams for rehabilitation and removal. And I want to call out that of that total $500 million, the Congress required that $75 million must go towards dam removals. So how much will South Carolina have available? We won't know until we get our grant from FEMA, but we are expecting that any day now. We were told the grants would be awarded on April 8th, and no one, to my knowledge, none of the other states have received their grants. So we're just kind of waiting on FEMA. Again, that amount for the fiscal year is $185 million. And I just doing some kind of just to get a ballpark of what we may see in South Carolina. If I use the percentage of the $22 million that was available in fiscal year 22, which was a little over 5%, that would mean we're going to potentially see $10 million in South Carolina. I'm hoping we're around that same or maybe more, that same level, but we'll hopefully get that award here any day, and we can update this information. We'll provide updated information on our website. Now, any dam owner who wants to pursue an HHPD grant needs to understand that the grant is not a 100%. It doesn't cover 100% of the costs. The grant maxes out at 65% of your total project. So that means there is a match that must come from the applicant, and it must be a non-federal source for that match of a minimum of 35% of the project costs. There's nothing that say that 35% has to be entirely in cash or expenditures. That 35% match can come in the form of donations, donated services, donated materials, labor, equipment, or it could come in the form of your own workforce. If you have if you have a staff of laborers, engineers, technical experts that can do some of the necessary work, their hours, their wages can form your match, and that those things in the red box, the donations and the force account labor, are what's called in-kind contributions. And so if you don't have the 35% match in cash, in-kind contributions can and are acceptable to make that match. So now let's talk about what makes a dam eligible for a HHPD grant. So first off, to be eligible for a federal grant that is designed to rehabilitate dams, that the dam itself must meet the federal definition of a dam. And this is found in the U.S. Code of Laws. And you can look that up if you want, but the language is right here. So the federal definition of a dam, the dam must be 25 feet or more in height, and it must have an impounding capacity at maximum storage elevation of 50 acre-feet or more. So it's pretty much the same as our definition of a dam here in South Carolina, except we do have the provision in South Carolina that a high hazard dam can be less than 25 feet in height and less than 50 acre-feet in impounding capacity. But as long as it could cause loss of life if it were to fail, then it can be a regulated high hazard dam. Now, such a dam, which may be regulated in South Carolina as a high hazard dam, would not meet this federal definition of dam. And so there are high hazard dams here that we regulate that do not qualify for this grant. So I want to make sure anyone on the call or on the meeting here understands that is a federal requirement. That's not something DHEC dictates. But there are high hazard dams in South Carolina that do not fall under this the federal definition of dam. Some of the other eligibility requirements, the dam itself cannot be a federal dam, so it cannot be owned by the federal government. The dam must be located in a state with a dam safety program. Happy to report that South Carolina does have a dam safety program. So everyone on the call can be confident they meet that requirement. The dam must be classified as high hazard potential by the state dam safety agency. The dam must have an emergency action plan that is approved by the state dam safety agency. That does not specify that it must be the most current EAP possible. But it does have to have the dam. You must have an EAP that has been approved by DHEC. And I think if you don't already know this, we do provide a service where we will help you create an emergency action plan. And our staff via the response at dhec.sc.gov, we can help anyone who wants that assistance create their emergency action plan. The next requirement, the dam must fail to meet minimum state dam safety standards and pose an unacceptable risk to the public. So essentially, the dam has to be in pretty bad shape. The dam cannot be a licensed hydroelectric dam. So what that means is the dam cannot be licensed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or that I don't know of any other licensing agencies for hydropower, but the dam cannot be licensed to produce hydroelectricity. The dam was not built under the authority of the Secretary of Agriculture, which that's a very specific category or provision. There are about 103 dams in South Carolina that were built by the Department of Agriculture. They are used for flood control and sediment control or erosion control. And so those 103 dams, not all of them are high hazard, but those dams would not be eligible for this grant program. And then the last one is that the dam's primary deficiencies are not solely the result of insufficient or inadequate maintenance. And so what that means is this grant program is not designed or intended to fix, to be a solution where dams have been just essentially neglected, and the owners have not, even performed basic maintenance. So, for example, if you're a dam covered in trees, if that's essentially the only deficiency, or that's not something the grant program can address, and that's not an eligible dam. Now, if you have issues with maybe your spillway has reached the end of its life, maybe the dam was originally a low hazard dam and it's now high hazard, and the spillway is not large enough, doesn't pass enough water. Those are eligible deficiencies, and if those dams have some trees, that's okay. That doesn't disqualify the dam, but the primary deficiency cannot be the result of insufficient or inadequate maintenance. And so, a lot of folks who are, it really has to be some a very more of an engineering deficiency, more of a either like I said, the dam has reached the end of its life, or the components have reached the end of their lives, or there is some a kind of intrinsic design flaw or inadequacy. That's really what we're looking for with this grant program. And then the last eligibility requirement is the dam must be either rated either poor or unsatisfactory by DHEC at its most recent inspection, or if it was rated fair, and has a population at risk of greater than 1,000. So poor or unsatisfactory, that's essentially the DHEC inspector makes that decision after a formal inspection, which for high hazard dams is every 2 years. And if your dam is not in poor or unsatisfactory condition, if it's in fair condition, then it has to have a population at risk of greater than or equal to 1,000 to be eligible. There is another category called satisfactory, which is the highest rating we can give. No dam rated satisfactory would be eligible for this grant program. And then the population at risk, that is something DHEC we can determine, or we do determine using a dam breach model called DSS-WISE. It's essentially estimating how many people are in the dam's inundation area. And so we do have those numbers for all of our dams. There are very few dams in South Carolina that DHEC regulates even come close to that number. So that means very few dams rated a fair in South Carolina would be eligible. All right. So now for the FY24 HHPD grant, as a result of those previous 10 eligibility criteria, we have determined that there are 43 dams for this grant year eligible in South Carolina. We have that list of 43 on our website. You can go simply to scdhec.gov/dams and follow the link to the HHPD grant website, or you can go directly via this longer link. And we are happy to discuss why your dam was or was not eligible upon request. And then one more caveat is that the list of 43 is dependent on FEMA approval. So that list is not final until we know FEMA has approved it. And essentially that approval comes in the form of our grant award. So again, any day now, we should hear from FEMA if we're approved and whether those 43 dams are all considered eligible. All right, so we talked about what makes a dam eligible. So just because a dam is eligible doesn't mean the owner of that dam can apply for the grant. There is a different set of eligibility requirements as far as who can apply for the grant. So if the dam is eligible, then there are two categories of eligible applicants. The first is any non-federal government entity. So that would be a state agency, that would be any county, municipal, or tribal government. That could be a special purpose district. And then the other category is a nonprofit organization. And nonprofits are essentially defined by FEMA or I guess more so by the IRS. It has to be a 501c3 or 501c4 tax exempt organization. And so there is a fact sheet regarding the 501c3 and c4 designations that we can provide. We will post on our website as well. But that's something to potentially, look into for homeowners associations. It could be possible for a homeowners association to qualify as a 501c3 maybe. I believe 501c3s are considered charitable organizations. And I really 501c4 was a recent kind of addition that FEMA has determined is also qualifies. but those are things you'd have to look into to see if your organization could obtain such a status. So if you're a private dam owner and you don't qualify for either, or you don't fall under either of those two categories, the non-federal government entity or the non-profit organization, how can you get access to some of this grant money? So you cannot apply directly. If a private citizen, if you don't meet the two previously mentioned categories, we cannot accept your application. So how can you get your eligible dam? How can you access these funds? You need to find a project sponsor that does meet one of those eligibility criteria, and that the sponsor is willing to apply on your behalf. And so the project sponsor would be, for all intents and purposes, the applicant, would be assuming responsibility for the project. The sponsor would be responsible for compliance with all the grant requirements, all the federal laws, regulations, responsible for the management of the funds, accounting for the funds, reporting on the funds, and so forth. And so this is a slide. Again, we're talking about where a dam owner needs a sponsor. This is a slide to kind of illustrate how that relationship would work. So if you have an eligible dam and you have a sponsor that's applied and received a grant, and then you begin, you start your project, you would start. So your contractors and your engineers would need to do work. So the grant cannot pay for. It can only pay for incurred expenses. So you'd have to have work performed and document that work with invoices and potentially other supporting documentation. That would go to the dam owner, who would then obviously pay those invoices. Then the dam owner would in turn go to the sponsor, the project sponsor, with all of the documentation, such as paid invoices, cleared checks. If the dam owner did have any in-kind contributions, either like donated materials, goods, services, or force account labor, that you would need documentation of that. A project status report, any deliverables that are required under the grant, and provide those all to the sponsor. And the sponsor would then reimburse the dam owner. All right, so now the sponsor is carrying some of the expense of the project. So the sponsor then turns around and provides what's called a request for reimbursement to DHEC, along with any quarterly progress reports and any deliverables that are required by the grant. And then DHEC, we would review that request for reimbursement. And if everything checks out, we would then reimburse the sponsor for the incurred expenses. And then lastly, even DHEC, we have to go to FEMA to make sure we get our money to basically fund this project. And that's essentially how this relationship would work. The eligible and allowable activities under the grant, essentially rehabilitation is a pretty broad term. So rehabilitation of a dam includes repair, replacement, reconstruction, or removal of a dam. So those are, if we're talking a construction project, repair, replacement, reconstruction, or removal would all be on the table. Any pre-award expenses are not eligible and are not reimbursable. What that means is any money or any cost you incur prior to receiving your award cannot be reimbursed. So as developing your grant application is not a an activity that can be reimbursed. Any design, any engineering you do before the award cannot be reimbursed. So what activities can be funded besides obviously construction or removal? Planning is eligible. Any of the preliminary engineering work, final design work, construction and demolition, and then lastly, even non-structural risk mitigation activities can be funded under the grant. And those are, we have a little definition of what that means, but essentially that can be thought of as activities that don't really touch the dam, but still have an impact on the risk that the dam poses. And so that's something we require at least some attention be given to what alternatives exist with regards to these non-structural risk mitigation activities. So before we would approve any type of construction or demolition project, we would want to see what exists, what possibilities exist to reduce risk separate from working on the dam itself. The grant, the activities have to be conducted within 36 months of the FEMA award to DHEC. So we're again expecting that award any day. So that period of performance would start any day now, April of 2024. And then all of the activities under this grant would need to be completed within 36 months. So April of 2027. However, there is the possibility for extensions, but those are subject to FEMA review and approval. DHEC cannot extend a period of performance by itself. Some examples of activities that are not allowable, and this is under the law. This is not DHEC. This is the Congress's list. You cannot rehabilitate a federal dam. You cannot rehabilitate a fully breached dam. You cannot perform routine maintenance and operation of a dam. You cannot, again, use grant funds to modify a dam to produce hydroelectric power. You cannot use the grant funds to increase the water supply storage capacity. And lastly, to make any other modification that does not also improve the safety of the dam. So now getting into some of the state and federal requirements, the list of laws, regulations, executive orders, programmatic requirements is long, and we can't really, we can only skim the surface in this presentation. But again, if a dam owner has to use a project sponsor to get access to these funds, the project sponsor is responsible to DHEC and FEMA for compliance with all of these state and federal requirements. And so due to that, DHEC, we recommend that the sponsor and the dam owner have a legal agreement, something in place that protects the sponsor and that clearly defines in the event of some kind of non-compliance situation that the dam owner really is responsible for the resolution of that non-compliance issue. And then the project sponsor, or the dam owner, or both, there is a requirement that all records associated with the grant should be retained at least 3 years. And if there are any kind of audits or issues or non-compliance findings, then records shall be retained as long as is necessary to resolve those issues. So again, to skim the surface of the state and federal requirements, in the environmental and historic preservation requirement is a pretty big one. There's the non-discrimination in the workplace would apply to any applicants or sponsors that are, essentially a corporation or some kind of or an organization. Procurement requirements, which is also a very big one. Cost principles, audit requirements, administrative requirements apply. Any debarment and suspension rules. That means you cannot be debarred or suspended from participating in federal grants or contracts. You must have drug-free workplace policies. For construction, you must follow the Fair Wages and Labor Standards Act, which is also known as the Davis-Bacon Act, which dictates that laborers and workers have to be paid a set wage, especially for skilled workers. The Federal Funding and Accountability and Transparency Act, the Single Audit Act, Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Act, if property is being purchased with grant funds, the Buy American, Build American Act. Hopefully, for most of our projects would not be a big deal or issue, but potentially, that could potentially be an issue that, could impact equipment, any electronics, any iron or steel components of a construction project. And again, then programmatic requirements. FEMA has stated FEMA requires that maintenance and operations, or at least there must be a maintenance and operations agreement in place for the life of the rehabilitated dam. So that's a commitment the dam owner or the sponsor has to make, and that only applies to construction. There's a requirement for a local hazard mitigation plan that addresses all dam risk. Only 3 counties have such a plan in place, and that means the remaining 43 counties would have to request a 12-month extension to create such a plan. And then a floodplain management plan is another requirement, and this is a plan that has to address flooding risks in the downstream area protected by the dam, and that has to be developed within 2 years of award. And then for construction projects, it has to be implemented within 2 years of completion of construction. All right. Take a little drink here. I've been talking for a long time. Does anyone have any issues with the with hearing or with any complaints so far? I haven't seen much activity in the chat, so I assume everything's going well. Okay, well, actually, this slide addresses the 3 counties, so I just saw that question. So the local hazard mitigation plan requirement is, again, it's dictated by FEMA. And and actually satisfying this requirement, it really is more falls on the county where the dam is located, more so than on the dam owner or the sponsor. But to comply with this requirement, you must either have the mitigation plan must be in place and approved by FEMA at the time of application. And you can see at the bottom, only 3 counties currently have plans in place and approved by FEMA. We have Pickens County that has created the plan. So we have a 4th, but it has not been approved. But I don't foresee any major issues. But we're waiting to see. We're waiting to see if Pickens gets their plan approved. The alternative is if the county does not have a plan, then you must in conjunction with the county, request a 12-month extension to develop a plan and receive FEMA approval. And a big, disclaimer, a warning is that if this 12-month extension, if this 12-month period passes, and there is no plan, and the plan has not been approved by FEMA, that could mean that any funds that have been utilized or expended have to be paid back. So that plan, getting that plan is a pretty big potential stumbling block. But 12 months is more than enough time to create a plan. We have 3 plans already in place that can serve as templates. So it's not something that is unsurmountable, but it is a very serious requirement. And again, and especially because no extensions will be granted on this requirement. The floodplain management plan, which I mentioned earlier, is also another requirement that FEMA requires. And this is essentially the floodplain management plan has to be specific to the dam and the area, the areas both upstream and downstream of the dam, where the dam in FEMA's terms, where the dam protects the area. So, dams do provide some amount of flood control. Some provide more than others. But the floodplain management plan is, has to be, has 3 main components. The first are the potential measures, practices, and policies to reduce the adverse impacts of flooding in the area protected by the project. It should have plans for flood fighting and evacuation. And then there should also be a component for public education and risk communication, targeting those communities that are in the inundation area. There's a lot of work going on right now at the federal level to create some templates and some guidance for how to create a good floodplain management plan. But again, you would have 2 years to develop such a plan, and then 2 years following construction to implement it. If you're not doing a construction project, it does not have to be implemented, but it still may need to be created. And let's see. And so again, here are the this is in FEMA's notice of funding opportunity. So this table shows what projects require a floodplain management plan. And so you can see some types of planning projects would not be required to develop a floodplain management plan. But then other types of planning, any design and any construction project would be required to develop a floodplain management plan. Regarding the dam removal aspect, or the dam removal, what's the word? How a dam removal floodplain management plan would look. We do know FEMA is on board with it being a very pared down, very simplified version of a floodplain management plan. So we still don't have a good example, but it at least would be a very we know it would not need to be as comprehensive as a plan for where a dam will remain in place indefinitely. Procurement is a big requirement. So anytime you're for the acquisition or you're soliciting for contractors, for engineers, surveyors, for material purchases, equipment purchases, et cetera. All of that triggers procurement rules and requirements. There is a distinction between informal procurement rules and formal procurement rules. I think that level, I think the threshold is $250,000. Less than $250,000, informal procurement methods can be followed. Greater than $250,000, you have to use formal procurement methods. There's another threshold at $1 million for architects, engineers, construction management, where a grant greater than or equal to $1 million has to use a qualifications-based method of procurement. And that essentially means you can't select your architect, engineer, et cetera, purely on the basis of price. Qualifications have to be taken into account first. And price can be a factor, but it can't be the primary factor under a qualifications-based procurement. Some of those formal procurement methods, such as requests for proposals, RFPs, requests for qualifications, RFQs, invitation for bids, IFBs. All of these must mention that federal funds are being used and federal requirements apply, especially when those federal requirements could affect the bid price or the quotation price. Those RFPs, RFQs, IFBs must be clear that anyone that enters into a contract will have to abide by, for instance, Davis-Bacon Act or Buy American, Build American Act. There are some of the state requirements. I guess this is more the reimbursement only. So no funds are advanced under this grant program. It's reimbursement only. And that's essentially a DHEC policy. And then the state procurement code also would apply for, say, a county or local government is the dam owner or sponsor. I don't think nonprofits would have to follow state procurement. They would have to follow their own procurement policies, and everyone has to abide by the federal requirements of 2 CFR 200 for procurements. As I mentioned earlier, construction will be allowed this year, but there are a lot of, I guess, special requirements that everyone needs to be aware of. We are this year, we can say, you do not have to have a construction ready project. So what that means is you do have to have a complete design, but it does not have to be at the state where all the permits have been obtained, all approvals are in place, and it is ready to go out for bids. So you can't have for construction, you have to have a pretty clear and well-defined project, pretty much fully designed. But you don't have to have, for example, maybe an Army Corps of Engineers permit does not have to be already in hand at the time you apply for the grant. As mentioned earlier, the floodplain management plan has to be implemented within 2 years of completion of construction. There is a requirement that there must be an operations and maintenance plan created for the project, for a construction project. And then the operations and maintenance commitment for the life of the improvement is also a requirement. The environmental and historic preservation requirement is potentially a very big stumbling block. So I want to point out, how it can be handled, or the best way to satisfy this requirement. So any ground disturbing activity, any project that could impact the 100-year flood elevations, any project that could result in the loss of farmland, any project that could have impacts to threatened or endangered species, or impacts to properties that are on the National Register of Historic Places, all must receive an EHP review. Again, that's not an exhaustive list of all potential project impacts that trigger EHP review, but those are probably the most common. And so the EHP review is performed by FEMA, but the application must provide everything needed for FEMA's review, such as a detailed description of the disturbance with the area, as in square foot or acres, or the dimensions of the area, the depth, if it's going to be if there's going to be excavation or soil borings or any kind of digging, the latitude, longitude, and the duration of the disturbance. And then photos of the existing area. All that will be used by FEMA in conducting the EHP review. Here's an example where even this was, where even something as basic as soil borings into a dam still triggered an EHP review. And so, as you can see in the application, FEMA had to provide the locations of each boring, the depth of each boring, and the diameter of the borings, and with photographs and with all the supporting documentation to get FEMA's for that EHP review, and then FEMA also required a public notice of the potential impacts, so a period for the public to comment regarding these potential environmental or historical impacts. The public notice can be in a newspaper, on a website, or with physical signage at the location. Those are all okay, and it must run for at least 30 days to allow for the public to comment. Again, here is an example of a physical sign that was posted at the dam or near the dam for the potential for impacts to the 100-year flood plain and for the geotechnical borings. So the sign was posted for 30 days, and any comments had to be provided along with documentation that of the 30-day posting had to all be provided to FEMA. And so let's see. So now, kind of, again, skimming the surface of all those state and federal requirements. Now we're going to move on to how to apply. So what constitutes an application for this grant? Well, there's a DHEC form to start with. It has to be fully completed. It's D4132, and it'll be on our website. There needs to be an eligibility narrative, why the dam and the applicant all meet the eligibility criteria. There has to be a project narrative to, what's this project going to do? What's, why it's been, what were the alternatives considered? What is the status of the project? Is it, is planning complete? Is design complete? What is the status? Is it bid ready? Is it, or what is the status of permits? All that kind of thing. If it's not a construction project, what is the plan to advance the project to final design and construction? What are the project milestones? That's important because that's how progress is tracked and reported both to DHEC and to FEMA. So identifying those major milestones has to be a part of that application. Has to have a detailed budget. Has to describe the procurement policies that will be followed. As we mentioned earlier, there's a match requirement. So where will that match come from? Is it going to be cash? Is it going to be in-kind contributions? Is it going to be a combination? A match commitment letter, so a signed commitment to to come up with that match requirement. And then either the FEMA approved local hazard mitigation plan or that extension request that we mentioned has to be coordinated with the county. Everything that FEMA needs for their environmental and historic preservation review, including with the checklist. Then more signed statements of assurance or certifications regarding a lot of those, such as the drug-free workplace, such as debarment and suspension. A lot of assurance statements have to be provided. And then lastly, that the floodplain management plan will be developed within 2 years of award. And this should also say for construction will be implemented within 2 years of the completion of construction. We require that a licensed professional engineer assist with the application. And lastly, the checklist for this year's application and all the forms and associated materials will be available on the dam safety website as soon as possible after we receive our FEMA grant. So now, how does DHEC review and make selections of projects? It really comes down to how many applications we receive and how much funding we have available. But this year, FEMA has a new requirement. It's the project prioritization tool. And so if we do have more applications than we have available funds, then we have to utilize this project prioritization tool as the primary screening method to make project selections. We do have the authority to take other secondary screening criteria into account, and we are still considering whether we will do that. I will say it's more than likely going to be a panel of experts that we will convene to essentially help us to rank and vote to make project selections based on project or personal expertise and professional expertise. But primarily it will be based using this project prioritization tool. And so I think that does bring up a question regarding this year's grant. Can dam removals still be giving a funding priority so that dam removals are prioritized over any other project? My opinion or my belief is that should still be possible, as a dam removal is essentially the greatest risk reduction that can be accomplished for any project. So removing the dam is the greatest way to reduce risk. And if the risk reduction is the ultimate, kind of the driving criteria, I think dam removal should still be able to take priority. But again, no project, no one should expect a guarantee of receiving any funds. This project prioritization, again, it just so FEMA, the methodology FEMA is requiring involves ranking dams on a basically a grid where along the x-axis are the estimated consequences of failure. And so that would be, again, using the population at risk from a dam failure. So what is the estimated population in that inundation area? And on the y-axis is a likelihood of failure, and that is a gauge of the condition of the dam and how likely that dam is to fail. And so the projects that show the greatest reduction in risk. So moving from upper right to lower left that's risk reduction. So the projects that show the biggest move from the upper right to the lower left would receive the priority. And so in this example, the purple, in purple is a dam removal project. And so you can see that a dam removal would essentially take the risk to zero, where both likelihood of failure and consequences of failure are basically in low and low or zero. So a dam removal should still be able to take priority compared to any other rehabilitation project. And again, like I mentioned, this project prioritization will only be implemented if we receive more requests for funding or more applications than the available funds can satisfy. And then we must follow FEMA's rules for project prioritization. And FEMA has developed the tools we are supposed to use for that x-axis and that y-axis, the values we use to essentially kind of plot where the dams fall. And so this is, I believe, the last slide. So we are doing good on time. Here's our timeline. And again, we can say we did successfully apply for the grant back on February 27th. And again, any day now, we're expecting a FEMA grant award. So hopefully that will be this week. So no later than April 12th would be nice. And then hopefully within, not long after that, we will post on the website our notice of funding opportunity with all the application forms and everything you'll need to apply, and then begin accepting applications. We're probably going to accept applications for about 2 months. And so until June 14th would be approximately the deadline. Again, everything is contingent on that FEMA grant award. We would hopefully within a week be able to do our initial application screening, and determine whether all the applications are funded, or we're going to have to use a prioritization approach. June, late June, we would rank the applications using the prioritization tool, potentially, incorporating our expertise and if we need a secondary ranking criteria, and then hopefully July 1st, DHEC, we submit our amended grant applications with all of our proposed sub awards to FEMA. And then it's really out of our hands until we hear back from FEMA that they have either approved our proposals or denied our proposals, or they need additional information. But hopefully by October, we have FEMA approval to make those awards. And then no later than I would say the end of the year, we're looking at actually executing sub awards with either the dam owners or the project sponsors. We did add these slides just for folks who, so we do have some slides for beyond this current grant cycle. If you're not eligible for this grant cycle, if either your dam or you, the entity that owns the dam, are not eligible, again, funding is secured for the next 2 grant cycles at $185 million a year. And so, if the dam wasn't eligible this year because it didn't have an approved EAP, that's something to start working on. If the dam wasn't approved because, it appears that it's just a result of lack of maintenance, then if you can help us identify deficiencies that are not solely due to a lack of maintenance, then perhaps your dam can become eligible. And then again, you can work with your DHEC inspector regarding the inspection rating. If you've been given a fair rating, but the inspector does not know of all the deficiencies that may need correcting, definitely work with your DHEC inspector. Maybe set up a new inspection before next year, and make sure your inspector knows of any new deficiencies or anything that the inspector may not be aware of. And lastly, the grant requirements do change. They've changed every year up to now, and they will change more than likely for next year. So we can't predict what next year will look like. So our recommendations for, if you want to apply, maybe next year or in the future, start your planning now. Talk to us if you have a project in mind. Remember, there's no construction without a complete design. It doesn't mean you have to have all your permits in place and be ready to go out for bids, but you do need to complete the design. You remember, procurement. If you want to do a planning or design project this year or in future years, remember, to use those into any engineer or consultant you're using, for them for those expenses to be grant eligible, you have to follow procurement. Even if it's before the grant award, as long as you follow procurement before the grant award, you can continue to work with the engineers or consultants that may be helping you with planning or with the grant application. If you don't follow procurement for your engineers or consultants, and with developing, then we can't guarantee that once you get a grant, you may have to use an entirely different engineer. You may have to follow some kind of a procurement process, and that may mean you're working with a completely different engineer under the grant. Contact your county regarding their local hazard mitigation plan. Tell them you want to apply for this grant, and this is a requirement, and you're going to need their assistance. You're going to need to coordinate. If you need a project sponsor, start that search. It doesn't have to be, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that may be willing to sponsor, especially for dam removals. Maybe, your municipality, it may be your county, it may be a neighboring municipality. There's no, maybe the inundation area, crosses into another county. So a different county may want to sponsor you. There's no limitation as far as, there's nothing that says it has to be your county or your municipality that is the sponsor. Coordinate with other owners and stakeholders. If there are multiple owners on your dam or of your dam, there's going to need to be some coordination. If there's stakeholders such as the people that live on the lake, people that are in the inundation area, maybe with DOT or other parties, definitely coordinate with those. And then regarding that, that cost match requirement, maybe you can find partners that want to provide some of the either donations or provide in-kind contributions of some sort. And so that's it for the presentation. Again, here's our information. If you want to contact us, the DHEC Dams website is where all the everything will be posted, including this presentation. Both the recording and the slide deck will be found on our website. So that's pretty much the end, and we can start with Q&A.
Okay. Well, thank you, John, for the presentation. We'll start running through the Q&A. Looking through the chat, so we're going to start with the chat first. But while we're doing this, if anybody wants to ask their question directly, if you could raise your hand, you'll see that feature you should see at the top of your screen within Teams, the little hand there. if you could click that button, and then we'll unmute those mics in order as they come in. But going through the chat, we've got a few questions here. I think, John, the first one you addressed as it came in, the 3 counties that the floodplain mitigate or that have the hazard mitigation plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did mention that. It's on one of the slides, and I'll just repeat it now. It's Anderson County, Oconee County, and Spartanburg County. And then we know Pickens County has a updated plan. It's just not received FEMA approval. So 3 counties are reliably, are solidly, compliant with that requirement. The remaining 43 would probably need some kind of extension request for that 12-month extension.
The next question we have, do you need a floodplain management plan if you are removing a dam?
Yes, that's in the federal, the FEMA NOFO, that it does require one. That's, I think it was one of these slides here. So as you can see, this is from the FEMA NOFO. This is not DHEC. This is the floodplain management plan required? Yes or no? If you look under construction, dam removals, it is a yes. So unfortunately, we cannot, that was the case in previous years. The dam removals did not require, well, hang on, wait a minute. I may be misspeaking. I'm sorry, previous years, yeah, that's I missed. So planning and design in previous years would not require floodplain management plan. So now this year, the new addition is that even planning and design may require a floodplain management plan. Regarding the dam removals, I did mention that can be a much more pared down plan. It does, and then both FEMA and what the National Dam Safety Review Board, which is a federal kind of advising board to FEMA, are working on streamlining these floodplain management plan requirements. The dam removals, again, should be very pared down, but there, the comment there in the chat about how it makes sense for a private dam owner or sponsor to develop a floodplain management plan when the private owner and sponsor are not government agencies, do not have authority over the floodplain, over the downstream areas, are not necessarily the ones to respond to flood risks. I think the National Dam Safety Review Board acknowledges that is a challenge, and I think the plan does not necessarily mean that the dam owner is more. I think the plan at least has to utilize. The plan can incorporate aspects of other existing documents or plans, such as flood management ordinances, or emergency action plans, or what else? There can be the plan can refer to other documents or other ordinances, etc. But there still has to be, the dam owner still has the responsibility, I guess, for the impacts of the dam failure. So that still has to be part of it. But impacts that are not the result of dam failure, that's at least that would be on the dam owners and the dam owner's engineer to at least kind of quantify those impacts, the flooding kind of profile of the floodplain, and at least provide that information in the plan. Now, how the actual authorities implement or act on that information, we understand. That's obviously outside the that's beyond the dam owner's control. So I think it's more of where the dam owner is not a government entity, or it's more about providing the information and let the, and then, if it's acted on or not, that's outside the dam owner's, power. So I don't know if that helps, but the question is definitely very, is definitely being weighed right now. It's very much up for debate, even now. So fortunately, it is something where there are 2 years to develop that plan. So I think by the time, I think pretty soon within the next few months, there will be much more clear instructions and guidance, and also some examples that can be used for as templates for some of these projects.
Well, thank you on that. I think that's everything we had in the chat, but if anybody has additional questions and wants to add them there, feel free. But we'll go to the hands raised now. First one looks like is Delane Clark. So we're going to allow you to, you should be able to unmute now, Delane, if you can go ahead and ask your question.
You may have to unmute her,
yes.
Sam.
Yeah, so the mic's enabled, Delane, but you may need to, or you have to unmute yourself.
I think I can.
Can you unmute from there?
Yeah, she has to unmute herself, I guess. Miss Clark, can you unmute your microphone? All right. Well, you can either contact me directly, Miss Clark, afterwards, or if you want to put it in the chat, that would work as well. Feel free to give me a call too, if that was easier. But you want to move to, I guess, to Linda Airy next, Sam?
Yes. So, Ms. Airy, if you could unmute, you should be able to speak now.
Well,
can you hear me okay?
Yeah, there we go. Yep.
Okay. All right. When we apply for the grant and identify our sources for our 35%, whether it's, our in-kind or cash, if after we submit the application, we're able to receive non-federal support, for example, maybe from Trout Unlimited, that we're trying to work with right now, are we able to take their donations and apply it toward our 35% after we've done the application, or do we have to identify everything up front?
Well, I mean, obviously up front, you need to have 35%, but
right.
But if that 35% is coming from, from out of your pocket initially, and then Trout Unlimited comes along and they can kind of offset what you would be paying out of pocket, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that could be, and that would probably just be a we always have the ability to amend the that would be covered under the sub-award agreement, and I think that could just be handled through an amendment of where that match is going to come from.
Got it.
But no, it doesn't have to be set in stone at the time of application.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, I think that's it. I think that's the end of her question. I think I addressed it. You want to move on to the next person?
So yeah, we have a third hand here. And I apologize. It just identifies you as meeting guest on here. So if you could also note who you are and what dam you're with. But you should be able to speak now.
Yeah. So unknown user is what I see. Do you have a question for us? If you can unmute your mic. All right. If you're having trouble, again, just email me or call me, or any of us after this webinar, or put your question in the chat. That's an option as well. So I guess moving on, Sam, to the next person.
Yep. So Ben, you should be able to unmute now. Ben, are you there?
He put it in the chat, it looks like, but that was the only question. So does that mean one application to cover multiple dams, or does that mean multiple applications for multiple dams? I think you can submit as many applications as you want, but it needs to be one dam per application, if that makes sense. Yes, yeah, you can submit multiple applications, but each application should be for one dam only. And, and again, that list of 43 eligible dams, that's, it has to be one of those 43, with the caveat that FEMA still has to approve that list of 43. And I think here's the list. All right.
Okay, so it looks like that's all we've got right now for questions. But we still have a few more minutes in our meeting window here if anybody has those, or any follow-up questions to.
Yeah, we covered a lot of stuff. I understand, everyone, it's a very complicated grant, and I will say that DHEC and a lot of the other states are trying to be advocates for simplifying this grant, removing a lot of the complexity, but but we can't, it's really up to Congress ultimately for streamlining or potentially removing some of these very burdensome requirements.
And John, if you could you go to the contact slide again, just so everybody can take that down if they need it?
Yeah, got to go.
So this webinar has been recorded. We will make this recording available to anyone who wants to come back and rewatch it. This will be put on our DHEC YouTube channel, as well as will be linked to the Dams Program's website directly. We also have the email up here, response@dhec.sc.gov, where we can take in any questions you have about particular requirements, about your dam's eligibility, anything else pertaining to this year's grant or upcoming grants in future years. But with that, John, do you need any other final comments?
Well, I mean, I guess we can, if either the Delane Clark or it looks like the other person lowered their hand, but Miss Delane, if you can try to unmute, we still have time to take a question or two if you can unmute your mic, but guess must be having some difficulties. But aside from that, I think we appreciate everyone's interest in the grant. We definitely want to, we want to see money going out the door, fixing dams. Again, that's something we try to stress to FEMA and to everyone that, we want to see, dams getting fixed. And, it's unfortunate the grant program is so complex, but it's something we've only, we haven't had this kind of resource for decades, and now we do. The long-term funding, is again beyond 2 years from now, when the last $185 million gets released. We don't know what to expect. But now is a good opportunity, that we can hopefully get some dams addressed. And I would love to see some removals and some rehabilitation. So we definitely hope to fund a lot of projects this year. Thank you, everyone.